us today. This webinar is being recorded. And so we thank you for joining us for our second in this quarterly Lunch and Learn webinar series on the ADA. And today we will be talking about the Americans with Disabilities Act, or ADA Title III. I am Jan Garrett, Deputy Director of ADA Programs for the Pacific ADA Center. And my colleague is joining me. Pat, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Pat Swartz, and I provide technical assistance for the Pacific ADA Center.
Great, thank you so much. So next slide, please. And I do want to just mention the fact that the slides will be available, and we can provide you with that, as well as a recording link at a later time when we have that. So just so people don't have to ask. So about the Pacific ADA Center, we are one of 10 centers nationally known as the ADA National Network. And the Pacific ADA Center serves Region 9. We are showing a map on the screen of the 10 regional ADA centers in different colors. And Region 9 is the green states in the lower left. So that's the Pacific ADA Center area, and that is Arizona, Nevada, California, Hawaii, and the Pacific Basin territories. So we provide, all of us, resources, training, and support to improve awareness and understanding of the rights and responsibilities of anyone covered under the ADA. Next slide. So let's start with, what is a disability under the ADA? The definition has 3 sections, or 3 parts. Physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities. And we have a list of major life activities, at least sample ones, on the right-hand side, such as walking, seeing, hearing, speaking, breathing, cognitive functioning, concentrating, normal cell growth, which would be involved in cancer, and there's many, many more major life activities. So that's the first section, of physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities, or having a record or a history of such an impairment, or being regarded as or assumed to have a physical or mental impairment. So that's what's covered as a disability under the ADA. So any of these things plus more are considered major life activities, and therefore would be covered by the ADA as a disability. Next slide. So another way to understand who is covered by the ADA is that you have a disability if your body or brain works differently than most people. And that makes it harder or even impossible for you to do things like see, hear, speak, think, walk, or breathe. And remember, some disabilities are visible or apparent, but most, in fact, some statistics say that over 90% of people with disabilities have non-apparent or non-obvious disabilities. So just because you can't see someone's disability does not mean they do not have one. So it's important to understand. Next. So we're going to test your knowledge here a little bit throughout this presentation. So our first quiz is here, and people can post their answers in the chat if you want to do that. And that just comes to the panelists and the presenters. So which of the following is not a disability under the ADA definition of disability? A, cancer, B, mobility impairment, C, a hangnail, or D, hearing impairment? Which is not a disability under the ADA definition of disability? A, cancer, B, mobility impairment, C, hangnail, D, hearing impairment. Okay, and most of you, virtually all of you, are saying C, which is correct and which you should be getting. Okay, excellent job. So I'm going to hand it over to my colleague Pat for the next few slides.
Okay, next slide, please. We're going to be talking now about Title III of the ADA, which is about public accommodations. And there are 5 sections to the ADA, or 5 titles. Title III has to do with places of public accommodations. So let's go on to the next slide and we'll talk about that. So what does Title III cover? First of all, it covers commercial facilities, which are private facilities like warehouses or factories that are open only to employees. And public accommodations are private businesses or nonprofits that lease to, own, and or operate places of public accommodation. And you'll see on the left that the ADA has, again, 5 sections. The first section covers individuals with disabilities in employment situations. The second, Title II, covers state and local governments. Title III is about public accommodations, which is what our webinar is about today. Title IV is about telecommunications for individuals who have sight or speech or vision disabilities. And then the 5th title has to do with several things, one of which is protection against retaliation. Okay, next. So places of public accommodations. Buildings and facilities that are open to the public and affect commerce, like selling things or getting grant funding, anything that has to do with money transactions that include things like service establishments, anything from gas stations, private hospitals, barbershops, offices. Sales establishments like grocery stores, bakeries, clothing stores. Social service centers like senior centers, homeless centers, centers for independent living. Restaurants and bars. Museums, libraries, galleries. Again, this is all about can involve transaction of money here. Theaters, movie theaters, concert halls, private stadiums, and private schools, colleges, and universities. And this is separate from public universities, which has to do with Title II, which is about state and local government. Okay, but private schools and colleges are covered under Title III, which are places of public accommodation. Okay, go ahead. So private and open to the public. People with disabilities have a right to buy things from, enter, or use the services of a private business or private nonprofit organization that is open to everyone. So if it is generally open to the public, people with disabilities have a right to access those services as well. So the public accommodation or business must construct accessible new buildings and facilities. So if they're building a new building, new facility, it has to be accessible for people with disabilities. They must remove accessible barriers that are readily achievable, which means cheap and easy, in their buildings that were built before the ADA. So if the building was built before 1990, there are times when those buildings were not accessible to people with disabilities. That doesn't mean that they are what are called grandfathered into the law. They still need to make it accessible for people with disabilities if it is readily achievable to do so. And they must modify some policies or procedures and provide effective communication, including websites, so that people who have disabilities can access websites like people without disabilities. Okay, next. And we talked on the previous slide about something called barrier removal. So the priorities are these. First of all, a person with a disability must be able to get into the building from the site arrival point, from wherever the entrance is into the building. If that's from the sidewalk, it has to be there. There are requirements for it to be wide enough for somebody to in a wheelchair to use it. Parking has to be accessible for somebody driving and for there to be accessible parking spaces. And that that building must, there are requirements included for accessible doors and maneuvering. So the door must be wide enough for somebody to get into the building in a wheelchair. And it must not be so heavy that they cannot open it with pretty much 5 pounds of pressure to be able to open the door. So it can't be too heavy to open. There must be access to the goods and services for the public. So once a person with a disability gets into the building, they need to be able to access whatever goods and services that business is providing, as any other person without a disability would. And then they must have access to restrooms. If there are any, there has to be an accessible bathroom for a person with a disability to use. And then any remaining barriers that exist. So there is an order to how these barrier removals are to be looked at and provided for. Okay, next. So what if the building has barriers and someone with a disability can't access it, but the business can't afford to fix it, whatever that barrier is? Well, there are some alternatives. Until it is readily achievable to remove those barriers, or if it is never readily achievable to do so, alternatives may be available, like you could offer curb service or delivery of goods. If someone cannot get into your establishment to pick up something that they want, you could offer to bring it out to them, offer curb service or delivery to that person's home. You could meet at an alternative accessible location. Let's say you have a therapy appointment and the office where the therapist is on the second floor with no elevator. Well, the therapist could offer to meet at an accessible location for that person with a disability. You could provide one accessible gender neutral restroom instead of having 2 separate bathrooms, one for male, one for female. You could offer one that's accessible for all, that is gender neutral. You could provide assistance to reach items on high shelves. Let's say you're in the grocery store and what a person in a wheelchair wants is way up high and they can't get it. The store could offer to have someone help you get those items from a high shelf. And rotate shows at a movie theater. If there's a center with 3 movie theaters and in it, and there's only one that is accessible, well, then you could rotate whatever the movie is to that accessible theater. Okay. All right, next. And maintaining accessibility. So that business, that public accommodation must maintain the accessibility in their buildings and facilities. You can't just fix it once and say that's it. Examples mean adjusting a door closing device to make the door possible to open. And let's say that changes over time, you need to keep checking it to make sure that door closing device is operable. Removing trash cans from the area next to the latch side of the door when you pull the door open. Sometimes people who are emptying the trash put it right in the way of the door, so someone in a wheelchair can't move it and can't use the door in the proper way. So it needs to be maintained to make sure that that is always the case. Keeping the wheelchair accessible toilet stalls clear of furniture and toilet paper storage. Same thing. You may have an extra toilet stall and decide to use it as a storage area. Well, you need to maintain whatever that accessible feature is and keep it clear. And clearing the lowered area of a bar or counter. Same thing. You might use that as a storage area. And the fact is, it needs to be maintained and kept clear in case someone in a wheelchair needs it. Okay, next. And there are tax benefits for businesses. There's a deduction for any business that removes physical and or transportation barriers, according to the code here, IR code 190. There's a credit for small businesses that remove barriers, provide communication aids or services, and or accommodate employees with disabilities. And there's a state tax credit and deduction that might be available. Tell businesses about these tax benefits to help them offer more accessibility. So that's always available. Okay, go ahead. And now quiz number 2. Which of the following is not a place of public accommodation under ADA Title III? A restaurant, B, factory with no public access, C, doctor's office, and D, nonprofit after-school program. And we are coming up with pretty much everybody is saying B, factory with no public access. That's correct. It's not a place of public accommodation. It's not open to the public. Okay. All right, good. Thank you. Thank you for those answers. Okay, Jan?
Great. Okay, and before I move on, I did see a couple of questions, so I'm just going to quickly say, so who determines if something is readily achievable? Well, that is something that the business has to decide based on the profits and losses of that business, or the nonprofit based on the funding that they receive. They're the ones who are going to have to determine that. If the nonprofit or the business gets sued, then the court is going to have to look at the financial statements and determine what really could be or would be readily achievable for that nonprofit or that business. So that's basically, you know, when it's determined. But in the first place, it really should be the business or the nonprofit determining that for themselves. And then what can you do to report a violation, or how do you enforce? We're going to be talking about that later in the presentation. So hang on. We'll get there in terms of enforcement and what do you do. But we usually suggest, you know, working with people if you can. Try to talk to the business first. Try to write them a letter. Try to, you know, work with them, because it's going to be a lot faster and a lot better relationship that you will have with them if you can try to negotiate something if they have barriers, and rather than suing them, because lawsuits are expensive and they do take a long time. You have the absolute legal right to file a lawsuit, and that is one of the ways that the ADA is enforced, in addition to filing a Department of Justice complaint, as we will note later. But it can also be really advantageous, really a good thing, to talk to the business, write them a letter, tell them what's going on for you in terms of the barriers that they may have or that they're not maintaining. Okay, so another responsibility that places of public accommodation have is to reasonably modify programs, policies, and or procedures. So examples of modifying these policies, programs, or procedures can include allowing someone with diabetes to bring food into a private library or a museum when normally the policy is no food inside the library or museum. But somebody with diabetes may get low on their blood sugar and need to be able to bring food in with them. So if they ask for that, that is something that you should do as a reasonable modification. Also, we're going to talk about service animals briefly in a moment, but allowing a service animal when you do not allow pets, that is modifying your no pet policy to allow service animals, which are a specific type of trained animal that work with somebody with a disability. So again, that's an example of a modification of policy, of your no pet policy. Another example would be moving tables and chairs in a restaurant or in a hotel room, moving furniture to create a path for a person who uses a wheelchair. And then also lowering a hotel room bed to make wheelchair transfers possible could also be a modification of that practice or policy. Next slide. So public accommodations have to also provide effective communication to people with disabilities that affect hearing, vision, and or speech. Those are the three types of disabilities that are covered by the ADA effective communication requirements. So examples of providing effective communication or providing communication aids and services could be providing sign language interpreters or remote interpreting on video, which is usually done through a tablet of some kind. We're actually showing you, we have an interpreter here today. Also, another example is captioning. We have a live captioner here today for this webinar. That's another example of people who may not know ASL because they may never have learned American Sign Language, but they may use captioning if they are deaf or hard of hearing. So that's another example of a communication aid or service. For people with vision disabilities, you can provide large print if they can see some but need the print enlarged. Braille, if they read Braille. Not very many people read Braille anymore, but some do. So you may be able to get your documents brailled, like for example, at a Lighthouse for the Blind, which has that service. Or you can provide electronic documents. A lot of people who are blind or low vision now have computers or phones in which they can have the technology read the document to them. So it depends on what they need. If it's like a live thing, like you need a menu, you might have a reader read you a menu in a restaurant, for example, if that's not online and it can't be read electronically. So these are all examples of different communication aids and services that you can do to provide effective communication to people with hearing, vision, and or speech disabilities. And the key is ask the person what they need, ask the person what they want, and then provide that to make sure that the communication is effective for them. Next slide. And then for access to education, when we're talking about private schools, private K through 12 schools, colleges, and universities are considered places of public accommodation that fall under ADA Title III. And they have to, again, meet the accessibility requirements of the ADA for their buildings and facilities like parking lots. So those buildings and facilities have to meet the ADA standards for accessible design. And they may have to also meet other state building codes. Also, private schools, colleges, and universities have to make reasonable modifications, like we talked about earlier, to some policies and procedures. They also need to give equal access to classes and exams to students with all types of disabilities that the ADA covers. So that might be learning disabilities, that might be neurodiversity, that might be vision, hearing. You need to give equal access to the classes and exams for all different disabilities. And then you may need to give effective communication, again, to students who have hearing, vision, and or speech disabilities. Next slide. So for accessible transportation, a lot of transportation that we think of is public buses, public commuter rail or light rail, that kind of thing. But there's also private transportation that is covered under the ADA Title III. So most private transportation has to be accessible to people with disabilities. And this includes certain taxis when they buy van type taxis, certain number of rideshare vehicles that have to be accessible. Hotel shuttles. So if a hotel provides a shuttle, they need to make sure that shuttle has a lift on it or provide an alternative that can actually give someone that uses a wheelchair a ride, like to the airport or wherever the hotel shuttle goes. It also, private transportation includes over the road buses like Greyhound or buses that may go to, tourist destinations like Las Vegas, for example. Those are private transportation companies. They also have to provide accessible vehicles. And most private transportation companies have to have accessible vehicles themselves or contract with a company that does. So you need to be able to provide the same level, the same type of transportation, even if you have to contract for that transportation. And many private transportation providers, like rideshare companies, now use apps. And those apps also need to be accessible. So that's part of effective communication. And the Justice Department that enforces the ADA has made it clear that private entities, private places of public accommodation, and private transportation providers have to make their websites and their vehicles and apps accessible as part of their effective communication requirements. Next. So our third quiz, and this is again just on the slide. We don't have polls. So we're going to read out the slide. We're going to read out the question and the possible answers to you. So what are private businesses and nonprofits required to provide under ADA Title III? A, reasonable modification of policy, practice, or procedure. B, personal assistance to use the restroom. C, effective communication. Or D, A and C. So D, the answer for D would be reasonable modification and effective communication, but not personal assistance to use the restroom. Okay, and are people giving us the answer? Is this one too hard?
There's a lot of D here, Dan, or Jan.
Okay, a lot of D's.
Mostly,
okay,
yeah.
Good. Yes, D is the correct answer. So that private businesses and nonprofits under ADA Title III have to reasonably modify policy, practice, or procedure. Remember, an example of that would be for somebody with diabetes being able to bring food in to the library if they need it. And they have to provide effective communication, like interpreters, like captioning, like alternative format documents or readers. But they do not have to provide personal assistance to someone to use the restroom. That is not required under the ADA. Personal services and devices like wheelchairs are not required to be provided by businesses or nonprofits.
And Jan, just as an addition, this comes up in a lot of our technical assistance. There are carts that are provided in places like grocery stores and Kmart, etc. And there are people who complain that they're not working or they don't have any at that store. They are not required. They are a courtesy that these places provide for people, and if they have them, great, but there is no requirement under the ADA that those carts be provided.
Right. Good point. And I do see that looks like Jake Plantz has a raised hand. Gabe, are you able to unmute them?
Sure, one moment, please. Oh, it looks like they unraised their hand. If you would like to still ask your question out loud, please use the raised hand feature again, and we can unmute you.
Yeah, please keep your hand up.
There we go. One moment, please. We are going to allow you to unmute your microphone. There you go. You can go ahead and unmute and ask your question.
Jim Vitale.
Jan, the one thing is, though, if you provide a wheelchair or a mobility device in a store, something like that, then you still are required to maintain that device if you provide it. And I think that's critical to understand.
Yeah, you are required. And the other piece of this is if you are a private hospital, for example, or a private clinic, and you provide services of being able to help people get dressed and undressed, or help people in the restroom, or you provide those mobility devices while you're at the hospital or while you're at the clinic, then you are required to provide those as a medical provider, and you're required to provide the service of dressing and undressing and using the restroom as well. So yes, that's a good point, Jim.
Thank you.
Yes, and did someone else have their, looks like Helen has her hand raised.
All right, Helen, we are going to allow you to unmute your microphone. One moment, please. Okay, you have the ability to unmute your mic. You can ask your question.
Thank you. This might be a complicated question, but I'm going to ask it anyways. An unhoused person released from a hospital going to a homeless shelter that isn't accessible, but then being kicked out because they can't use the restroom. And I see here, I'm getting an understanding in another area I've been trying to figure out how to work on. You know, if personal assistance to use the restroom is not available when a restroom is inaccessible, and then they get kicked out of an unhoused shelter because it's not accessible, it's kind of a loop there. So how would you gauge that, or how would you try to improve that? Because that's a public facility.
Yeah, and it is a complicated question. First of all, the hospital is not supposed to discharge somebody until they have a place that is safe and accessible for them to go. That's point number one.
I get you there. Yeah, that's okay, go ahead.
Okay, and then point number two is shelters are typically operated by nonprofits, or they may even be operated by a state or local government. It's possible they could be operated by a county or a city. And either way, they would fall under the, if it's a private nonprofit, they'd fall under ADA Title III. If it's a city or county, they would fall under ADA Title II that covers state or local governments. Those shelters are required to be accessible. They are required to have restrooms that meet accessibility requirements, but they are not required to help people in the restroom. But they are absolutely required to meet accessibility requirements and to remove barriers. You know, if they have to do that, if they have accessibility barriers.
Okay, so that's why we're stuck in a loop. Thank you for that helping, because it helps me to simplify my thought process here as I further work on this in the community. Thanks so much.
Yeah, but it does start with the hospital.
Oh, I totally agree with you there, and that I totally agree with, but and you know, thank you.
Sure, no problem. Okay, let's move on to the next slide. Thank you for your questions. These are all excellent points. It looks like Nat, is it Nat Dean? Before we move on, we can take your question.
Hello, Nat. One moment, please. We are going to allow you to unmute your microphone.
I apologize if it's Nate and not Nat. So,
All right, you can unmute your microphone and ask your question.
go ahead. We're not hearing you. It looks like your microphone is unmuted, but we're not hearing you.
If you'd like, you can type your question and I can read it out loud if you would prefer it that way.
Yep, we still see your hand, Nat or Nate, but we can't hear you. So please type your question if you can.
It looks like it's a comment. Homeless shelters and domestic violence shelters are covered under HUD.
Yes. Also covered under Fair Housing Act. That's correct. But because this presentation is on the ADA, we didn't really talk about Fair Housing Act, but yes, Fair Housing Act can also apply to those. But regardless, the ADA would require them to meet accessibility requirements. But good point. Good point. Okay, next slide. I think we're gonna try to keep going here. So Pat's going to talk to us about service animals briefly.
Under Title III. Okay, next slide. So public accommodations that include businesses and nonprofits have to modify no pet policies to allow service animals. A service animal is any dog. It may have to allow a miniature horse in some cases, but it's a dog that is individually trained to do a task that helps a person with any type of disability. And you as the manager or owner of the business can ask two questions. You can ask, is the dog a service animal? Is the dog a service animal required because of a disability? You can't ask the person what their disability is, but you can say, is the dog a service animal that is required because of a disability? And the second question is, what work or task has the dog been trained to perform? Those are the two questions that you can ask. The dog must be housebroken and well-behaved, and it must be on a leash or tether and under strict control. And before we go on, there are also emotional support animals. Emotional support animals.
That's on the next slide, I think, Pat.
Whoops. Okay, go to the next one. Sorry, I forgot.
Yeah.
Okay, right. Emotional support animals or comfort animals are not considered emotional support or comfort is not considered work or a task. Emotional support animals, also known as ESAs, are not service animals. They're not individually trained. They may not be under control, and it can be any animal, not just dogs or miniature horses. They are allowed in housing with a medical professional letter. It's important to know that they are not covered under the ADA. But again, they are covered under the Fair Housing Act and are allowed in rental housing with a medical professional letter. Okay? So go ahead. And here's a quiz. What are service animal handlers required to do? A, answer the two questions about their animal. B, keep their service animal under control. C, make sure their animal is trained to do one or more tasks. D, all of the above. And we have everyone saying,
Just
pretty
about
much
everyone.
everybody's saying all of the above, D.
Yes, that's right.
Okay.
So, and I did see the other questions come in about the leash or tether. Yes, you can have the dog off the leash or tether if the leash or tether interferes with what the dog does for their handler. But they still must be under strict voice control. They are not allowed to run around. They are not allowed to, they must be right by their handler, and their handler must be able to control them either with hand signals or strict voice control. Okay. And so I see Stafford, I think, had a question first, and then Keith, and then Jim, because you've asked a question before, we'll come to you last. But Stafford, I think, had their hand up for a while.
Hello, Stafford. One moment, please. We are going to allow you to unmute your microphone. Oh, there you are. Okay, you can unmute your microphone and ask your question.
Okay. Yeah, a couple of questions on service dogs. First question was, we still have a lot of abuse in our locale with people bringing in their pet dogs. They're not a service dog. Has there been any update on the law regarding that issue?
Well, I mean, there's no update. The regulations are the same as they were. You can ask the two questions. If they're out of control, you're allowed to exclude the animal. If they are out of control, then you're allowed. So it's more about the behavior of the animal, and if they can answer the two questions for you. If they can, and the dog is under control, you need to allow the animal. If the dog is not under control, you do not need to allow the animal. But if you exclude the animal, the person gets to come back.
And it's up to the, it is up to the owner of the business to enforce this. If
Yes.
they don't enforce it, then there's nothing else. Then there's nothing else to do. You have to decide whether you are going to have a pet policy, a no pet policy in your business, or not. If you don't have a no pet policy, then emotional support animals can come in. if you don't have that, if you don't have a policy in place.
So I assume that if they refuse to answer the two questions, they can be the dog can be excluded as well.
Yes.
Yes. They do
Okay.
have to answer the two questions. Now,
Oh.
if it's a really obvious, like if it's a guide dog and it's obvious that someone is blind, you don't need to ask if it's a service animal required because of a disability. So you don't really need to ask question 1. And truthfully, if it's a guide dog, you probably don't need to ask question 2 either. So use some common sense when you're asking whether or not an animal is a service animal and determine whether or not you really need to ask that. Okay.
Okay. I had a couple other questions, but I'll wait until the any part of your presentation.
Okay. And then I know I saw Keith Miller and then Chris and then Jim and then Christine. So Keith Miller, did you want to unmute?
Hello, Keith Miller. We are going to allow you to unmute your microphone. One moment, please. Okay, you can unmute your microphone and ask your question.
Hi, Jan. Hi, Pat.
Hi.
Hi, Keith.
Jan, you always know this is my favorite topic. But emotional support animals for someone who suffers from depression. Can that be, and that person says, well, it helps me not be depressed. Can that be considered a service?
Potentially, yes. I don't know, Pat, if you want to address this or you want me to.
Go ahead, Jen. You've got
Okay.
it.
So, I mean, the bottom line is, as we said in that earlier slide, it can be somebody with any type of disability that uses a service dog. So it can be somebody with a mental health disability. It can be somebody with a learning disability, a physical disability. As long as that dog is trained to do a task to assist that person with their disability and the dog is under control, then they are a service animal and the person can answer what that dog does. So it may be someone that has anxiety, for example, and that is a mental health disability. But if the dog is trained to nudge their hand or lead them over on the leash to sit down when the dog senses that the person is becoming anxious, that is a physical task that the dog is doing, and that is a service animal, not just an emotional support animal. If the thing that the dog is doing is just making them feel better by being with them, that is a service. I mean, that is a comfort animal or an emotional support animal. That is not comfort or emotional support is not a task, but leading somebody to sit down, licking their hand, nudging them, all of those things can be considered a task. And that is a service animal.
And one other thing, sometimes people with mental health disabilities have what they call a psychiatric service animal. So it's, again, if that dog can perform a physical task for that person with that mental disability, then it is a service animal.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Okay. So, Christine, I see your hand up too. And I know Jim has hand up before. So right after Christine, I'll go back to Jim.
Hello, Christine. One moment, please. We are going to allow you to unmute your microphone. Okay, you can unmute your microphone and ask your question.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay. I'm just curious about something, and that is sometimes you'll see service animals with vests on. I'm wondering if the vest is a recognized, if not ADA required, certainly an assist to acknowledging that the animal is a service animal.
So there is no collar, vest, certificate, nothing. The only thing you can do to determine if an animal is a service animal is ask the 2 questions and get the 2 answers. So do not buy those certificates online. You do not have to purchase a vest. Some people do because it keeps people from asking questions about their animal. But please only buy the vest if it's really a service animal and that it's under control and it does a task for you. But nothing is actually legitimate in terms of showing that something is a service animal, only asking the 2 questions and having the animal under control.
Okay, thanks.
Yep. Okay, and I also see Vicky Balmes, I think. I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name.
Hello, Vicky. One moment, please. We are going to allow you to unmute your microphone. Okay, you can unmute your microphone and ask your question.
So I also put it in the Q&A, but I know that religious entities are exempt from following or for having to follow ADA requirements for accessibility. But I also have heard that if they receive federal funding, that may not be true. And the specific case that I'm thinking about is involves a service animal. And so I'm wondering if you could say anything about that.
Well, yeah, generally, yeah, I mean, if an entity receives federal funding, then that is covered under the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, and they have to modify policies. So they would have to modify a no pet policy to allow a service animal, even if they're a religious entity. They also often are covered by state and local building codes as well. They are not exempt from those. If they make alterations or they newly construct facilities, they have to follow those accessibility codes in the state and local building codes. So that's another way where they are not exempt from accessibility requirements.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. And then I think other people that I'm seeing, Shireen Rogers is one person I'm seeing that had not asked a question before. Others, do you still have a question or did you just not lower your hand? So Shireen.
All right, Shireen, one moment, please. We're going to allow you to unmute your microphone. Oops, sorry about that. Oops, give me 1 second. Please keep your hand raised so it doesn't move you around on the list. Thank you. There you go. You can unmute your microphone and ask your question.
Hi, thank you. I had submitted 2 to the question and answer, so I didn't know if you wanted me to wait. Originally, when you were talking about making something readily achievable, I was wondering if there was a percentage of profits that is common or a factor that's used by the courts to say, if you get this much profit, this percentage should be going towards making the store achievable, readily achievable or accessible, sorry.
You know, it's really, my understanding of it is that it is a case by case basis. It depends on what barriers you need to remove and how costly that barrier removal will be. It depends on your profits and losses, or if you're a nonprofit, it depends on the funding that you receive. It is really very much an answer of it depends, which is often an answer to many questions under the ADA. And it is very individualized case by case. There is no particular percentage. In state law, in state building code, there are some requirements for, how much for alterations and some other kinds of things like that. But in terms of what is readily achievable, it's really going to be a case by case basis.
Okay, and were you going to be discussing the web content accessibility guidelines at all or no?
Not really here. I mean, there are web content accessibility guidelines that are out there, and Department of Justice has asked people to use those. But the new rule that's out from Department of Justice about web accessibility is for Title II entities. It's for state and local government entities. But Department of Justice has been consistent in saying Title III, places of public accommodation, have to also meet effective communication obligations. And that means their websites also have to meet accessibility requirements. And generally what Department of Justice has said is that that's Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, or WCAG 2.1 AA.
Right. Yes, thank you.
And that's for mobile apps and websites.
Thank you.
Yes, but that's not under ADA. That's a different, only the Title II requirements are under ADA right now as a final rule.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, Stafford and Keith and Christine, do you still have questions? Okay, people are lowering their hands. Okay, I got you. Okay, we don't have too much more more to cover here. So we're just going to cover the end here, and then we'll see if we have what time we have for questions. Okay. So next slide. Yeah, I see Christine, you've raised your hand too. So what can you do to enforce your rights? I told you earlier that we would be covering this. You can contact an advocacy organization like a Center for Independent Living, a CIL, or the National Disability Rights Network. So in California, that's Disability Rights California. In Arizona, that's Disability Rights Arizona. So there's a National Disability Rights Network center in every state. And so you can contact your Center for Independent Living or your National Disability Rights Network Center to help you advocate for your rights and to understand your rights. You can obviously also contact us to help understand your rights. We don't do advocacy at the ADA Center, but we can help you understand your rights and refer you to the precise Center for Independent Living that serves your area and the National Disability Rights Network Center that serves the state that you're in. You can also file a complaint with the U.S. Department of Justice, even if it should go to a different federal agency, like even if it's about housing, which is generally not covered under the ADA, the Department of Justice will forward that complaint to HUD if it needs to go to Housing and Urban Development. So you can file a complaint with U.S. Department of Justice on ada.gov, and they will get it to the right federal agency, or if it's meant to stay with them, they will either fix it, contact you, or they will tell you that they are unable to do anything about your complaint. You can also file a complaint with your state human or civil rights department or your state attorney general. Those are all places that you might actually get a quicker response. I know in California, the civil rights department you can file with, and in Arizona, the Arizona attorney general is often pretty active on these issues. So you can try that. And then you can also hire a lawyer and file your own lawsuit. And you can do that whether or not you file a complaint with the Department of Justice. So you can do both, or you can do either one. Okay, so, but I would recommend to people that you try to, do this so that it's easier and that you don't have to enforce your rights by litigation, that you actually can just enforce it by talking to the person or by working with them or by working with the Center for Independent Living to enforce your rights. Okay, next slide. So businesses and nonprofits cannot punish you for asking for your ADA rights. They cannot refuse to serve you in the future or anything that would be considered retaliation or punishment. They cannot do that. That is actually not allowed under the ADA. Okay, next slide. And then here's a number of helpful resources. The ADA National Network, again, that we are a part of, the Pacific ADA Center is a part of, at adata.org, the U.S. Department of Justice. ADA website is ada.gov. Lots of very helpful information and resources there. Again, the National Disability Rights Network, you can go there to find whatever member agency serves your states. And then the National Directory of Centers for Independent Living. Again, you can find the CIL that serves your area by going to this directory. Okay, and yes, you will get copies of the slides so that you will have access to these links. Next slide. And then we do have 2 more future quarterly webinars, Lunch and Learn webinars on the ADA. On September 24th, we will talk about ADA Title I employment requirements and people's rights under employment. And then on December 3rd, we will be talking about effective communication more in depth. I know we touched on it here, but we'll be talking about it more in depth on December 3rd. So join us for those, or hopefully you'll join us for both of those upcoming quarterly webinars. Okay, and then next slide. So, and this is how you stay in touch with us at the Pacific ADA Center. This is how you can call us toll free, 1-800-949-4669. 4232. You can also email us info@adapacific.org, info@adapacific.org. You can also check out our website, www.adapacific, so adapacific.org. We have a really good website in plain language with a lot of great resources. And then you can also, we encourage you on our website, you can join our email list. We encourage you to do that if you haven't already done so. We do send out a really helpful monthly newsletter, and we have these webinars and other webinars and information that could be helpful to you. And you can also follow us on social media. And so we show the @Pacific ADA Center on Twitter, Pacific ADA Center on Facebook and LinkedIn, and then @Pacific ADA Center, all spelled out, on YouTube. So we encourage you to do that. And then Christine, I know you've had your hand up, so I'm going to let you ask a question, and then I'll see how many other questions we can get to that are in the Q&A or the chat.
Hello, Christine. One moment, please. We're going to allow you to unmute your microphone. Okay, you have been allowed to unmute your microphone. You may ask your question.
All right, thank you so much. Okay, so it's more of a comment, and that is to say that here in San Jose, California, we work very closely with the city and other community-based organizations to put together a fair package of small grants. They're not super large, but they're not super small either, to local businesses to help them with compliance of ADA, depending on the modification needed. I'm wondering if there is a either a clearinghouse or a database for other community or communities to tap into to find out whether or not, if you're a business owner, they offer assistance in some way or other to help with ADA compliance.
Well, I mean, they can always contact the ADA Center. And then we do know at least what some of the cities and counties are doing in our region, which is, Arizona, California, Nevada, Hawaii, and the Pacific Basin. So I would encourage them to contact us. They can also contact the California Commission on Disability Access, or CCDA, if they're in California. There is a lot of really excellent information from them for businesses. Also, the small business offices in a lot of cities will offer information. And I know Regina was posting, do we recommend that businesses obtain a CASP, which is a Certified Access Specialist Program inspection and report? Yes, we recommend that people get a CASP report. And just so people know, the Pacific ADA Center also has a new ability to do this. We have a consulting fee for service part of our of what we do at the Center on Disability. It's called Beyond Access Consulting. So we can send you the CASP list where you can hire any CASP you wish, but you can also contact the Pacific, or actually the Center on Disability that the Pacific ADA Center is part of, and we can help do a facility assessment as well if you want us to do that. So just let us know, whether you want a referral to someone on the CASP list or you want to talk to us about doing an assessment, and we're happy to talk to you about that.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you. And I think we are basically wrapping up now, because I do also have to be on another training right after this. So I'm sorry that we didn't get to everyone's questions. Please email us info@adapacific.org or call us toll free. Pat or Dawn will be happy to help you with that. Any specific questions that you have, and we really encourage you to continue to stay in touch with us. Thank you very much for coming today.
Thank you.
And thank you, Gabe, and the interpreter and the captioner today as well. Okay, everyone.